Hello, good evening, and welcome back to another episode. Now, I'm not going to lie, I've tried to record this video several times now, and I keep on tripping myself up because I'm equally enthusiastic and disappointed by the topic of this evening's video. You see, we've just got back from having watched SPECTRE, the latest Bond movie at our local cinema, and me and my wife were so excited to see this film. We have enjoyed Daniel Craig's tenure as Bond over the last 9 years, I suppose, with the Bond movies, but I guess from when he was cast, more than a decade. He has brought to the screen a gritty Bond. Lots of people talked about this being a post-Jason Bourne Bond with the fight scenes, but also a believable Bond, a Bond who is modern and genuine in his Britishness. Now, that might sound a bit strange to people who aren't British, but I mean, when I say that, I mean that he's believable as a well-educated, but not perfect, not overly smarmy, but still polite, ex-SAS, slightly damaged, egotistical Brit. He is very believable in the role, and we've really enjoyed that. We've also enjoyed the cast of characters which have surrounded him. Not least, of course, the story arc started in Casino Royale with the death of Vesper Lynd, and the effect that it has on him. That was somewhat borne out in the story of Quantum of Solace, but has echoed in the films since. And her story, and indeed the story of people linked with the organisation who were blackmailing her, is really where SPECTRE comes back into Bond's sphere. Now, that all sounds superb. You know, that all sounds exactly what we want to see. After the amazing heights of Skyfall in terms of the emotional journey that Bond goes on, but also the cinematography and the overall package of that movie, we were promised a return to some of the classic Bond tropes. And that's the other thing as well. As much as we've enjoyed Daniel Craig's Bond, we've also slightly missed some of the fun and the silliness, you know, the puns, the gadgets, the possibly over-the-top bad guys. And both Daniel Craig and Sam Mendes, the director, said that they wanted to bring that back for the follow-up to Skyfall in SPECTRE. Now, the film starts off so well. It sets out such a powerful stall. It has this very long, I would guess 6-minute long shot going through the Day of the Dead in Mexico, up into a hotel building, out onto the roof. This epic, I suppose, tension building, ratcheting shot where you get this sense of, right, okay, you know, you think you've seen what we can do in Skyfall. You ain't seen nothing yet, people. And you're like, oh, and it just builds and builds and builds, but then it never quite pays off what it's saying it's going to do. And that's kind of the theme, really, for SPECTRE. In so many ways, the film doesn't quite deliver. It doesn't deliver on, for example, the story arc, of which they've established since Casino Royale, because characters are awkwardly squashed into boxes where they don't really belong. Bond's, I suppose, arc in this film, both physically, as it were, where he is, and emotionally, doesn't really feel true. It's odd, but it doesn't feel as real as it has in previous Daniel Craig Bond films. The story of one character in particular, called Dr. Swan, I won't tell you who she is or how she's related to people who know Bond, but her story arc is downright just, ridiculous, because she starts off as a very strong, powerful, cynical, well-educated, determined woman, Dr. Swan, but she ends up completely out of the blue just saying, "I love you, Bond," and then she sort of drops it again towards the end of the movie. She sort of wakes up and realises who she is and why it was that she probably shouldn't really be in love with James Bond. It's an unbelievable character and an unbelievable character arc. It serves the story, but it doesn't serve the established emotional depth and for want of a better word, realism that we've seen in the previous Daniel Craig Bond films. So SPECTRE slightly drops the ball when it comes to the character arc established in the previous Craig Bond films. But then also it doesn't quite follow through on the promise of the classic Bond tropes. As we saw in the final scenes of Skyfall, we were back. We were back in the classic M office. There was a money penny. This was going to be Bond, and Bond, a brash, bold Bond, a return to Bond. And it's sort of promised at the beginning of the movie. There's an element of gadgets which may come in handy. There's some tongue-in-cheek moments where Bond possibly takes gadgets that he shouldn't. It's good stuff. But then it just doesn't follow through. There's probably the most boring car chase scene I've ever seen on film in this movie. And that's a crime, isn't it, in a Bond film? They're chasing through Rome, and all the while there's some comical moments where certain gadgets aren't working in the car. But but the worst part is that actually, because there's lots of corners in this chase, for most of this car chase, Bond is on the phone, and the bad guy isn't even in his rear view mirror. The bad guy is always just around the corner. So there's no real sense of danger. Bond is never really actually in peril. And that is surely something which has to be at the centre of what's going on, especially following, again, the wonderful Skyfall, the amazing way in which Bond was put in uncomfortable scenarios. In this film, there is actually an attempt to put him quite literally in an uncomfortable scenario where he's actually put on a torture bed. Basically, he's in a situation very similar to in Goldfinger with the laser, but it's not a laser this time. And there's very specific things which apparently are occurring, and the effects of what's occurring should be very noticeable. For example, he should lose his balance. It's not really a spoiler if I say that. So the torture occurs, and you're like, "Ooh, this is a bit tense. This is a bit gruesome." But then, when he essentially escapes, those effects aren't manifest. Nothing actually mattered. That whole sequence was just to build tension, which is never really paid off. You know, the guy escapes, and he's no worse for wear, really. The same really also sort of applies to the bad guys. There is an attempt to nod towards the bad guys of old in Bond. I won't spoil how or who it is that turns up in this movie, but again, it doesn't quite work because they're trying to create force, as it were, this overarching plot and theme that somehow this bad guy has been orchestrating all of the negativity, all of the pain in Bond's life, starting with the death of Vesper Lynd all the way through the death of M, for example, in the previous movie. That somehow this guy is the one in charge. This guy is the man who has to be brought down. And not only is he brought down fairly quickly, and towards the end of this film, he's essentially rendered moot. Pretty much, completely negates the apparent terrifying power of the SPECTRE organisation. But also, it's not really explained. There's a hint. There's a hint as to why this person feels so passionately about Bond, but it's never really earned, and therefore it's never really paid off. So we have a whole series of things which look good and sound good and should be amazing, but it doesn't quite work. So we went into this movie convinced that we were going to love it. We love Daniel Craig as Bond. We love both the gritty Bond, but also were yearning for a bit of the old, slightly naff Bond as well. And on both fronts, the grittiness and the cool cheesiness, the humour, the gadgets, we were let down. And that's a real, genuine shame. We wanted desperately to love this movie, and we don't. And I think there's one moment in this film which really underscores the problem. And if you don't want to hear about this, I'm going to definitely spoil this. If you don't want to hear about it, fast forward to this point in the video, and you should avoid being spoiled. But basically, the DB9 from Skyfall, which was ignominiously, poignantly, but brutally blown up outside Skyfall. The DB9 is reconstructed, or in the process of being reconstructed during this movie. And at the end, Bond drives it away. And you sort of feel that that's kind of what this film has done. The film has, despite the great strides which have been made for Bond as a character, as an emotionally deep and rounded human being with flaws and with strength, these great strides have been slightly negated. You know, they blew up the car, but they didn't want to leave too much of a mark, too much of a legacy on the Bond substance, as it were. So they rebuild it. Don't worry, people. Don't worry. It's okay. You know, the car's still there. It's okay. There's not even an attempt to say, "Oh, we've got you a new car." They're literally rebuilding the old car, and that's a bit of a shame. It feels like a slight backward step, as though they just didn't quite have the cojones, as it were, to see this plan, to see this arc through. Now, speaking of plans, speaking of the arc of the whole movie, but also actually the preceding movies, there is this slightly, conceited effort, this slightly awkward effort to make it feel as though somehow this person has been in charge all along, and this is, as the character says in the trailer, that this person is the author of Bond's pain. And ultimately, none of it is earned, and none of it is earned because it wasn't actually the plan from the beginning. It's been such a disappointing experience. And the thing is, as my wife quite rightly said, it wouldn't have taken much to fix it. Maybe a couple of extra lines explaining, I suppose, the depth of the jealousy, perhaps, that this bad character, that the bad guy feels for Bond. Maybe a couple of lines explaining why Bond recognises and feels something about this character. A little bit more depth, a little bit more to earn the payoff which they think that they've given us. But it isn't. It isn't earned, and unfortunately, it does let the journey, the arc, the mountain or whatever that they've climbed in the past 10 years of filmmaking, it does let it down with a slightly damp squib. So all in all, this isn't a bad movie at all. I'm really not saying this is a bad film. It's a disappointing film. Given the effort that they've put in the past decade to rebuild Bond, to reclaim him from the campish extreme heights that they took him to with the later Brosnan movies, for example in Die Another Day, that was just ridiculous at times. The Vanish instead of the Vanquish, for example, the Invisible Car. Given the effort that they've put in to achieve that, this film has been a disappointment. And really, considering that pedigree of the most recent Bond films, that's just not good enough. And especially in the same hands as the team who created Skyfall, we were expecting more, and it could have so easily been more. It's kind of like watching a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful painting which is almost finished, but then someone comes in and uses slightly wrong colours here and there. It's still, the overall effect is very impressive, but it's just not quite what it could have been. And that's such a shame. So I suppose I don't know, if I gave out scores, I'd give this film a B+. But yeah, I don't know. I just felt I had to get this off my chest, and also really on behalf of my wife. We've been talking about this for most of the evening now, and we're quite disappointed. Anyway, guys, simply had to talk about this. As I said, I don't often do film reviews, but if and when you see Spectre, please let me know what you think. I'd love to see your thoughts and comments below, so please do let me know. And as ever, until next time, do take care. Bye-bye.